The world's most critical energy corridor didn't close with a bang. It closed with the quiet thud of Iranian mines sinking to the seabed of the Strait of Hormuz. And what that means for you, for your gas prices, for your economy, and for what you think you know about American military power is something most people are not being told clearly. Right now, as of this week in April 2026, the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow 21-mile-wide passage between Iran and Oman, is functionally closed to commercial shipping. Major shipping companies, including Maersk, CMA CGM, and Hapag-Lloyd, have suspended all Hormuz transits indefinitely. Over 150 vessels sit anchored outside the strait waiting. Roughly 13 million barrels of crude per day were passing through this waterway in 2025, representing about 31% of all seaborne crude flows. That flow has stopped, and here is the part that should genuinely disturb you. The United States Navy has no dedicated minesweepers in the Persian Gulf. Iran has an estimated 2,000 to 6,000 naval mines. That gap between what Iran has placed in that water and what the most powerful navy in human history can do about it right now is not a small story. It is the story of our time. It tells you something about the real architecture of global power, about who actually controls the levers of the world economy, and about the extraordinary cost of decisions made in Washington long before anyone wanted to admit that this moment was coming. Now let's slow down and really think through what is actually happening here, because the way this story is being told in most mainstream coverage skips over the structural reality in favor of daily tactical updates: who fired what missile, what Trump posted on social media, what the latest round of ceasefire talks produced. Those things matter, but they sit on top of a much deeper foundation, and if you do not understand that foundation, you are going to misread almost everything else. So let's start at the beginning. The Strait of Hormuz is not just important, it is, by any reasonable measure, the single most consequential maritime choke point on the surface of the Earth. Approximately 20% of global oil trade, or around 20.9 million barrels per day, and 22% of liquefied natural gas flows normally transit through this strait. Think about that for a moment. 1/5 of the world's oil, nearly a quarter of its liquefied natural gas, all of it squeezing through a passage narrower than the distance between some American cities. And on one side of that passage sits Iran, a country that for decades has built its entire military doctrine around exactly one idea: if you come for us, we take the strait and the whole world economy bleeds. This is not a new plan, it is not improvised. Iran's IRGC mine arsenal predates this conflict by decades. Iran began stockpiling naval mines during the Iran-Iraq War, importing Chinese-designed EM-52 rocket-propelled rising mines and Soviet-era contact mines, and developing indigenous variants through its defense industry. They have been preparing for this moment for 40 years. A 2025 U.S. Congressional Research Service report estimated the stockpile at 5,000 to 6,000 mines, a mix of moored contact mines, bottom-influence mines, and more sophisticated non-magnetic variants designed to defeat Western minesweeping. Non-magnetic variants. Think about that phrase. Iran has specifically engineered mines that are designed to resist the detection and clearing methods that Western navies rely upon. This is not a country that stumbled into a crisis. This is a country that spent 4 decades preparing for it. Now contrast that with what the United States did. In September 2025, 5 months before this war began, all 4 U.S. Navy Avenger-class mine countermeasures ships stationed in Bahrain, USS Devastator, USS Sentry, USS Dexterous, and USS Gladiator, were decommissioned on September 25, 2025. All 4 gone. Additionally, the MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters, long the backbone of airborne minesweeping, were phased out in August. These were the dedicated tools, the specialized, purpose-built assets that the United States maintained in the Persian Gulf specifically to deal with Iranian mine warfare, and they were removed from theater 5 months before a war with Iran began. The Navy has stated it has no plans to recommission any Avenger-class vessels, so they are gone permanently. What replaced them? The theory was that a new generation of littoral combat ships with mine countermeasures mission packages would take over. The transition plan sounded reasonable on paper, but here's where it gets almost incomprehensible. The 3 Independence-class littoral combat ships, designated as replacements, USS Canberra, USS Santa Barbara, and USS Tulsa, were located in Singapore and Malaysia when they were needed in the Persian Gulf, thousands of miles away. And it gets worse than the geography. The Pentagon's own testing office found that the Navy has not provided sufficient data from operational employment of the mine countermeasures systems on these ships to determine operational effectiveness. The replacement technology, the thing that was supposed to fill the gap left by the retired minesweepers, had not even been proven to work in real conditions. The United States went into a war with Iran holding a mine-clearing capability that its own testing office had not certified as operationally effective. Now someone in Washington will tell you this was all part of a planned transition, that unmanned systems are the future of mine warfare, that the old ships were outdated. And maybe there is something to that argument in a peacetime strategic planning document, but strategy lives or dies not in the planning room, but in the moment when a real adversary does a real thing in real water. And the real thing Iran did was start laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz, beginning in late February 2026, the first large-scale naval mining of an international waterway since Iraq mined Kuwaiti waters during the 1991 Gulf War. Iran did not wait for America's unmanned systems to be certified. Iran did not wait for the replacement ships to sail from Asia. Iran moved when the window was open. And now consider this detail, because it captures something essential about the nature of this situation. Iran reportedly mined the Strait of Hormuz and appears to have lost track of the mines it planted. It is therefore unable to fully open the strait. Read that again slowly. Iran laid mines in international waters, the world's most critical shipping lane, and then lost track of where some of those mines are. Which means that even in a scenario where Iran sincerely wanted to reopen the strait as part of a diplomatic agreement, it physically cannot do so with any confidence. No single nation can reopen one of the world's most critical shipping lanes on any meaningful timeline. The strait is not just strategically closed. It is, in some meaningful physical sense, dangerously unpredictable water that no one fully controls anymore. Think about what this means for the ceasefire negotiations that have been underway in Islamabad. On April 12th, J.D. Vance announced that the talks between the U.S. and Iran had failed, and one of the central obstacles, one that diplomats found themselves unable to solve around a conference table, was the physical reality that the strait cannot be quickly cleared, even if both sides agree that it should be. The mines are in the water. Some of their locations are uncertain. Clearing them takes weeks at minimum, requires specialized ships that are not in theater, and carries enormous operational risk for whatever vessels attempt it. Diplomacy cannot simply declare the problem solved and have ships sail through safely the next morning. So what is the United States actually doing about this? President Trump ordered the Navy to begin clearing mines and to blockade Iranian ports simultaneously. Both destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz and operated in the Arabian Gulf as part of a broader mission to ensure the strait is fully clear of sea mines previously laid by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, CENTCOM said in a statement. Trump himself posted that we will also begin destroying the mines the Iranians laid in the straits. Any Iranian who fires at us or at peaceful vessels will be blown to hell. That is presidential language. It signals resolve. But signals of resolve and operational capability are two entirely different things, and right now the gap between them is vast. The US moves to blockade the Strait of Hormuz in a high-stakes bid to choke Iran's economy and force American conditions, a mission with major naval costs and considerable risks, according to analysts and former US military officials. The blockade order applies to all Iranian ports, but executing a sustained naval blockade while simultaneously clearing mines, while simultaneously protecting those mine-clearing vessels from Iranian drones, missiles, small boats, and potentially submarines, all in water where the enemy has prepared for exactly this scenario for decades, that is not a mission that resolves itself quickly or cleanly. Iran still has the ability to fight back with mines, an unknown number of small boats that can carry missiles, surface drones, aerial drones, and land-based cruise missiles, as well as shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles that could target helicopters and fighter jets, protecting ships in the water. The mine problem is not isolated. It exists inside a broader threat environment that makes every ship operating in that waterway vulnerable. And then there is the ally problem. When the United States needs help with something genuinely hard, and clearing thousands of square miles of mined international waterway qualifies, the question of coalition support becomes critical. Analysts said Washington may have to look outside its own ranks to get a thorough sweeping of mines in the Strait of Hormuz, but the coalition has not materialized the way Washington hoped. NATO allies refused Trump's call for help, and the UK offered only drones. According to Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy, The best minesweepers in Europe are months away from showing up at the Strait of Hormuz, while America's more limited resources in the region could clear the strait only over significant numbers of weeks, months, weeks. Meanwhile, the global economy is running on strategic petroleum reserves and creative rerouting. And what does the economic damage look like in real terms? Because this is ultimately about more than military hardware and tactical positioning. This is about what ordinary people in the United States and around the world are going to feel in their lives. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz following the outbreak of military conflict with Iran on February 28, 2026, is the latest example of a geopolitically driven oil supply disruption, and Federal Reserve research indicates global real GDP growth could fall significantly if the disruption persists. A short closure of the Strait of Hormuz is an oil shock. A long closure becomes an inflation and growth shock. Those are not the same thing. An oil shock is painful but temporary. An inflation and growth shock restructures economies. It changes what things cost, what businesses survive, which countries face political instability, and how ordinary households budget for the basics of life. Oil markets reacted quickly, with Brent crude prices rising above $90 per barrel, and higher energy, fertilizer, and transport costs are rippling through freight rates and global supply chains. On March 6th, Qatari Energy Minister Saad Sherida Al-Kabi warned that if the war continues, other Gulf energy producers may be forced to halt exports and declare force majeure, and that this will bring down economies of the world. That statement deserves to be taken seriously. Qatar is not a marginal player. It is one of the world's largest liquefied natural gas exporters, and its energy minister is not given to theatrical statements. When someone in that position uses language like bring down economies of the world, they are describing a scenario they can actually see from where they sit, and they are worried about it. Now step back from the tactical and economic details for a moment and consider the larger picture that all of this paints. We have a situation where the United States, the country that has maintained a naval presence in the Persian Gulf for decades, the country whose entire post-World War II strategic posture was built around securing global energy flows, the country that fought the Gulf War in 1991 partly to protect oil market stability, finds itself in a position where a regional adversary has used a weapon system that is literally thousands of years old to effectively close the world's most critical energy corridor: sea mines. The technology has existed since the American Civil War. It requires no satellites, no advanced electronics, no sophisticated supply chains. It is relatively cheap to acquire and stockpile, and yet it has succeeded in doing what no other weapon in the Iranian arsenal could accomplish. It has created a situation where the most powerful navy in the world cannot simply sail in and fix the problem on a timeline that the global economy needs. This is not a failure of courage. The men and women of the United States Navy are not the problem here. The problem is institutional. It is the product of decades of procurement decisions, strategic assumptions, and budget choices that systematically underinvested in mine warfare capabilities, while Iran systematically overinvested in exactly that domain. The US Navy retired its last 4 dedicated minesweepers from the Persian Gulf in September 2025. 5 months later, Iran began mining the Strait of Hormuz. With tanker traffic down 70%, no Western coalition forming, and India and Pakistan running independent escort operations, the Hormuz crisis is rewriting the naval procurement agenda for every energy importing nation. Every energy importing nation. Think about how many countries that encompasses. Think about what it means for the strategic calculations of Japan, South Korea, India, the European Union, every country that has built its industrial economy on the assumption that Persian Gulf energy would flow reliably through that strait. India and Pakistan sent destroyers to escort tankers in the Gulf of Oman, although not in the Strait of Hormuz itself. India launched Operation Urja Suraksha, deploying frontline warships to escort Indian-flagged cargo ships. These countries are not waiting for the United States to solve the problem. They are adapting to a new reality in which American naval dominance cannot guarantee the energy flows their economies depend on. That is a profound shift in the geopolitical assumptions that have governed the post-Cold War world. Asia receives 84% of Hormuz crude flows and faces the most severe impacts, while Europe's energy security has deteriorated significantly, with several EU countries heavily dependent on Gulf oil imports. The countries watching this crisis most closely, Japan, South Korea, China, India, are drawing conclusions about American reliability as a guarantor of global order. Those conclusions will shape investment decisions, alliance structures, and strategic partnerships for years to come, long after the mines in the Strait of Hormuz have been cleared and the immediate crisis has passed. And here is perhaps the most unsettling dimension of all this. Experts warn the true threat of naval mines lies in their psychological power to paralyze global trade without a single explosion. You do not need to sink a ship. You do not need to kill a sailor. You simply need to place enough doubt in the mind of a tanker captain and a shipping insurance underwriter that the risk calculation shifts, that the rational decision becomes to anchor outside the strait and wait, rather than transit and risk hitting something that may or may not be there. Iran has achieved that outcome. The strait is not physically impassable for every vessel, but it is psychologically closed. And in global commerce, psychological closure produces the same economic damage as physical closure. What does all of this tell us about the world we are living in right now? It tells us that the geography of power is more complicated than the size of a defense budget. It tells us that asymmetric capabilities, cheap, unglamorous, decades-old technology deployed with patience and doctrinal commitment, can neutralize advantages that cost hundreds of billions of dollars to build. It tells us that strategic decisions made in peacetime, when the immediate costs seem manageable and the future risks seem abstract, can produce catastrophic vulnerabilities when the moment of actual conflict arrives. And it tells us that the world order that Americans grew up believing was stable and permanent, anchored by American military supremacy and the free flow of global trade, is undergoing a genuine structural challenge in real time. The Strait of Hormuz crisis of 2026 is not just a Middle East story, it is a story about the limits of conventional military power in the face of prepared asymmetric resistance. It is a story about the real costs of institutional neglect in strategic planning, and it is a story about how quickly the economic life of the entire world can be disrupted when the one choke point that holds it all together becomes contested ground. The mines are in the water, the ships are waiting outside, and the United States is trying to solve a problem that Iran spent 40 years preparing and America spent 5 months before the war dismantling its ability to address. That is the situation, stated plainly, and understanding it clearly, without the fog of political spin or the distraction of daily tactical noise, is the first step toward understanding what comes next.